Hello, and welcome to River Network's self-paced learning series focused on key characteristics of a healthy organization. This is the fourth and last episode in this series, meant for new or young groups and organizations, or those organizations looking for a reset or refresh. In this episode, we're going to talk about basic budgeting and work planning. Whether a group or organization is just starting out or years into their work, tracking your resources and aligning them with goals and actions will pave the way for flexibility, adaptability, resilience, and higher impact for your work. For those who aren't familiar with River Network, we work to grow and strengthen a national network of water, justice, and river advocates. We convene and build our network with training, resources, peer groups, technical support, funding support, and in person gatherings like our national conference, River Rally. River Network envisions a powerful and inclusive movement that ensures abundant clean water for all people and nature to thrive. We believe that joy and hope for our planet flows through our rivers. Our work includes three focus areas: climate resilient communities, healthy and resilient rivers, and clean, safe, affordable drinking water. We work to build strong organizations and leaders across all of these focus areas, which is what brings us here today to talk about the key characteristics of a healthy organization. At River Network, we know that we do our best work in partnership with others. This video training series is a collaboration with the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, an organization in New York State that is uniting and empowering communities to protect their shared waters. Funding for this series comes in part from the New York State Environmental Protection Fund through the Hudson River Estuary Program. If you watched the first 3 episodes in this series, you recall that we're working off of the Organizational Health Checklist, which includes 5 characteristics all organizations should work toward establishing. The first item on the checklist was the mission statement, which we covered in episode 1. In the second episode, we talked about leadership models and decision making. The third episode reviewed defining roles and ways to recruit new folks to serve in your group or organization. Today, we're finishing off the series with budgeting and work planning. At the top of the pyramid, budgeting and work planning are supported by all of the layers below. A strong mission statement, structured leadership, and well-defined roles throughout the organization all feed into a healthy budget and a well-coordinated work plan. Remember, you can refer to the checklist for an overview of this topic. We're coming into this episode knowing that budgets are one of the most stressful parts of managing a group or organization, and second to that is usually planning. At River Network, we hear again and again that budgeting is a skill folks do not feel comfortable with, and that planning of any kind takes too much time and energy. We want to assure you that what we're presenting in this episode is as basic and accessible as it gets. It's not meant to be complicated or to force a goal that isn't aligned with your work or your values. We approach budgeting and work planning in a way that works for groups of volunteers as well as established organizations. Budgeting and work planning are very intertwined topics. A good budget lays out what is needed to complete a work plan, and a good work plan references the budget for alignment and resources. So, what comes first? We would suggest starting with your budget. It will ground you when you start creating a work plan to be aware of the financial resources and existing expenses. Ultimately, both of these deliverables will lead to sound decision making for leadership and others involved. So, starting with a budget. What is a budget and what kind of information does it give us? In the simplest of terms, a budget contains income, the money coming in, and expenses, the money going out, over a specific period of time. For the purposes of this episode, we're going to refer to monthly budgets and annual budgets for the most part. We find it helpful to have organizations track income and expenses on a monthly basis and to accumulate that data so you can project an annual budget in the future. Budgets tell us how much money we spend and on what, as well as how much money we receive and from where. Ideally, a budget tells you how much money might be left over to make investments in people, supplies, or programs. A good budget should be able to answer a variety of questions beyond the basic ones on the previous slide. When a budget is detailed and accurate, we should also be able to learn where we can save money on monthly expenses, where we're spending too much money and need to be more conservative, where most of our money comes from, as most groups or organizations have multiple revenue types. If we have revenue types that aren't generating much income and consequently need more attention. if we have money to do the work we plan on doing, if we have resources to respond to changes in expenses, and ideally what those resources are. There are other questions that a good budget can answer as well. Data is a powerful tool, and when we manage our financial data with care, we can feel more confident in making sound decisions. As you start thinking about your group's or organization's financial data, you'll want to engage the appropriate people in creating and reviewing the budget. When creating the budget, you'll need access to bank statements, fundraising documents, grant agreements, or other documents where income and expense information exists. Generally speaking, the group or organization leadership should be engaged, as well as the treasurer, and perhaps program leads who understand the hard costs of completing the work. You may choose to incorporate others. There isn't a hard and fast set of rules regarding who participates in budgeting. When the budget is created, you'll share it with the board or advisory members of the group for approval. It should be a standing item to review the budget at monthly board or operational meetings. You should plan to estimate and track your budget monthly and use data over time to create an annual budget. When sharing the budget out to the board or other leaders in the organization, you'll want to summarize and hit high-level points. A budget presentation doesn't have to be a detailed slide deck with graphs and tables, but it should contain a few basic points. First and foremost, a breakdown of your current income. How much money did the organization earn during the time period you're reporting on? Secondly, a breakdown of current expenses. The biggest mistake I see small organizations make here is listing expenditures line by line on their meeting agendas or in their board meetings. That level of detail is usually not helpful, and you'll quickly see eyes glaze over all around the room. A snapshot of expenses is much more helpful. Categorize expenses into large buckets like personnel, communications, events, and supplies. If someone has a question, have your line item budget handy to answer it, but by no means does everyone need or want to see it. Of course, be sure to compare expenses against income as a group. Third, you'll want to mention revenue composition. Where is your budget coming from? Grants, online donations, business sponsorships? Breaking this out by amount or percentage can be helpful. If you want to get fancy, generate a pie chart with the breakdown of incoming funds. This can be very helpful in creating projections for future months or years. Lastly, including projections helps leadership plan ahead and anticipate changes. For instance, if half of your income last year came from grants, but you aren't applying for those grants in the next fiscal or calendar year, showing a projection of your revenue without the grants will be extremely helpful. Additionally, if you've been working remotely but maybe decided to lease a small office space starting this summer, projecting your expenses with that new cost included gives you time to plan ahead for the increased expense. Budgets and projections also help us achieve good fundraising. Looking at actual revenue, we can see where we've been most successful in securing funds and what funding sources are most consistent and dependable. Projections allow us to dream a bit, though. If we were to increase business sponsorships by 20%, what more could we achieve? If we were to add membership revenue, what percentage of our income would now be unrestricted funds? When our first earned grant is added to our budget, what percentage of costs will it actually cover? Use good data for your projections, and you can make some solid decisions for your organization. I've pulled a very quick example from River Network's 2024 annual report. We included an expense and income snapshot that just shows the composition of each category. This was a perfect level of detail for a public-facing document. We could add additional expense detail if we were using this chart internally to make decisions. We could also use the income chart on the right as is in a presentation to our board of directors to show them that we have diversity in our income streams. If they have a question about the foundations that make up 41% of our funding, or if individual contributions usually make up 16% of our funding, the relevant leaders can have that information on hand to answer those inquiries instead of sharing out too much information and detail on the front end. Getting back to the details of budgeting, there are different tools you can use. On the basic end of things, you can use the reports from your financial institution like bank statements or spending analyzers to start building an idea of the money coming in versus money going out. You can use an Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheets to log transactions. We've provided a basic budget template for you to download. It's a spreadsheet with pre-populated formulas and income and expense categories. You should personalize this for your own use, being mindful to check the formulas if you start deleting rows or columns. From a spreadsheet tool, you can directly generate basic graphs and charts to share with leaders or board members, or even in your own annual report, like the example I showed previously. On the less basic end of things, you may consider using a bookkeeping software like QuickBooks, Xero, or Martis. These do come with a small subscription fee, and there are a lot of different programs out there, so find the one that works best for you if that's what you'd like to use. All of these software options essentially do the same thing, especially in their simplest subscription levels. You can usually sync your bank feeds to the software and categorize income and expenses inside of the software. A note here, if you do business with a small financial institution, bank feeds may not sync automatically, but you can always manually upload a bank statement to the software and it will import information from your statement instead. Bookkeeping software can generate reports like profit and loss statements, budget versus actual statements, and comparison reports to see differences month to month. You can also set up rules so certain transactions auto-categorize when they come into the software, which cuts down on some manual labor. Whether you choose to track your budget in a spreadsheet or utilize bookkeeping software, the most important thing is to keep your tools up to date. Software and spreadsheets don't do anything for you if you're not updating them with accurate and current data. Set aside time once per month at minimum to complete bookkeeping. Ideally, if you have regular activity on your books, this should be done once per week. And if completed that frequently, bookkeeping should only take a few minutes. As I said, we have provided a basic budgeting tool for your use. You can download the accompanying spreadsheet and review it for relevance to your organization. We've suggested revenue categories and expense categories that should generally work for a group or organization, but you may feel it's important to separate out or consolidate some lines. As you personalize the spreadsheet, be mindful, as I said before, of adding rows or columns, as this will impact the formulas in the subtotal rows, as well as the total revenue, expense, and net income rows. You can update the formulas if needed. The net income row at the bottom of the sheet will produce one of three outputs. A $0 net income means your budget is perfectly balanced. Your expenses perfectly match your income, or they're so close that the amount is negligible. This is a fine place to be. It means you can maintain your work as is so long as there are no major changes to income or expense. In nonprofit and community-based work, it's often said that the goal is a balanced budget. While this is true, we'd ideally like to work towards the next option, which is a net income that has a positive value or is over $0. This means that you're building reserves. Your income is greater than your expenses, so you have more money than you currently need. Even in nonprofit or community-based work, this is a great place to be. It means you can build a safety net in case of future changes or make strategic decisions about how to grow your work and have higher impact. The last option that you may end up with is a negative value in your net income line, which is less than $0. This unfortunately means that you are operating in a deficit. Your expenses exceed your income, and you may need to cut back on some expenses or increase fundraising efforts to close the gap. A few rapid fire questions that I hear sometimes. What if I don't have a bank account? That's okay if you're a small group that's not incorporated and if you don't have much money moving in or out. If you want to entertain receiving grants or are approached by someone who wants to make a large donation, it really is best to open a bank account for the organization or to find a fiscal sponsor who can accept those funds on your behalf. A fiscal sponsor is an incorporated entity with the ability to accept and manage funds on behalf of a smaller or unincorporated group. Fiscal sponsors are becoming more common and less stigmatized in the community-based organization landscape. I also get asked, what if we're making money? We're a nonprofit. We're not supposed to make money. We talked about this on the previous slide, and congratulations. You get to make decisions about maintaining reserves or making investments in new personnel, supplies, and communications, or other impact areas for your work. This means you can grow. Lastly, I hear, do I really need to keep receipts? It's kind of annoying to do, but it's a good idea. I recommend scanning and filing them somewhere digitally. It's helpful to have them in case of financial procedures being violated, in case of audit, or in case of human error in bookkeeping. A paper trail can be very helpful. Let's take a deep breath. The budgeting part is done for now. I want to acknowledge again that budgeting seems to be one of the most stressful parts of organizational work. Choosing tools and systems that work to your advantage should be the priority. We're going to shift gears and discuss work planning. You may have heard a few different terms: roadmaps, work plans, strategic plans. While they all have their own purposes and scopes, they all essentially do the same thing. They guide an organization or group over a specific period of time, categorize work in a strategic way, and present actions to be taken to accomplish that work. We'll use the term work plan in this episode. Work plans help us pace our work throughout a given period of time, plan ahead for capacity, stay on track, and hold us accountable, which in turn honors the intentions that we have for our work. And most importantly, work plans help us marry our ideas with our resources and capacities. Work plans, above all else, should be accurate and realistic. Work plans can happen on many different scales as well. There's no need to plan years in advance like a strategic planning process might do. Honestly, you don't even need to plan a year in advance in some cases. Work plans can be monthly, quarterly, or biannually. With small organizations that are volunteer led, I find a quarterly work plan to be a sweet spot. It's digestible, achievable, and produces fast results that keep volunteers invested in the work. Organizations with paid staff should gravitate toward an annual work plan, though. Engaging staff hours in work planning should be a high impact but infrequent activity. You don't want to spend down staff time creating new work plans every month or every quarter. When we start a work planning process, we'll want to start by convening a team. This might be an organization's board of directors, an organization's paid staff, or otherwise a group's leadership team. Start with what you're already doing. What is the work that is ongoing or committed to in the very near future? Make a list of all of those programs and projects. Don't overlook administrative work when making this list. If you're investing time or energy on it, it should be in the work plan. Fundraising, board activities, newsletter writing, coalition meetings, financial management, and other activities should be accounted for, especially if you don't have paid staff. Review your list of current and committed work. Are there realistic and achievable areas to grow, refine, or continue this work? You'll want to identify what aligns with your capacity and include that in your work plan as well. You'll then categorize the work. Some example categories include programs, projects, campaigns, outreach, operations, and development. There may be others that feel relevant to your organization as well. Feel free to add them in. I will note here that it can be helpful to do this activity with pen and paper using sticky notes. In a large group, I will often prompt folks to list current work and growth ideas on sticky notes, and will assemble them into a work plan by moving them around into different categories and timelines. You can then transcribe all of that information into a work planning template. Speaking of templates, we've included one for your use. You can download the work planning template, which is currently laid out for a year, and personalize it to your liking. There are no formulas in this one, so add or delete rows to list your work areas. Additionally, feel free to delete or rename columns so the work plan reflects the timeline you need. We've included a few example items in the template. You'll notice that they include committees in parentheses listed after each item. We find it helpful to pair actions with people because it helps build an understanding of needed capacity and ensures responsibility for everything listed in the work plan. You can list individuals, committees, working groups, or others while making those assignments. We've pre-populated the work plan with 5 categories. Programs are the evergreen or ongoing work. They aren't bound by the time of the year and are usually the core of the mission-driven work of your organization. Projects or campaigns are time-bound. They occur over a specific period of time, and then usually they close out. You might replace a project or campaign with a new one at that point. Outreach and events are public-facing initiatives that generally work to increase recognition of your organization. Operations include everything that keeps the lights on, financial, administrative, etc. And board development or leadership development is the category that includes investments in your governance, skills, committees, and leadership. Again, personalize this for your use. Let's take a pause here to think about integrating budgeting and work planning processes. This slide lays out some scenarios for how we might interpret budget data to inform the work plan. If your budget is balanced, you can maintain your work as is. The work you currently do is dependably funded. If your budget is in deficit, you need to add more fundraising actions to the work plan or dial in the program planning. There should not be expansion showing up in your work plan without adequate fundraising capacity if your budget is in deficit. If your budget is generating reserve, you can consider investing in new materials, people, programs, or any variety of higher impact activities to achieve your mission. Plan for realistic growth that's aligned with your financial reserves. If your budget tells you that you have a single revenue stream, meaning that all of your revenue comes from the same place, you will want to develop fundraising actions in your work plan and likely improve outreach capacity as well. Diverse funding streams are safe funding streams. And if your budget fluctuates often or seems seasonally impacted, you'll want to align work planning actions with net positive or balanced budget months. Perhaps think through fundraising capacity that can support months of low income. There are dozens of more scenarios we could cover, but we hope these examples get you thinking about how to integrate your budget into your work planning process. Again, budgets are tools that help us make good decisions about our organizations. Aligning resources with actions and capacities makes your work more sustainable and dependable for the people and communities you serve. One of the most disappointing things I hear from groups and organizations that engage in work planning or strategic planning of any kind is that they don't actually use their plans. Why spend all of that time and energy making a plan for it to sit on a shelf and collect dust? Your work plan should be front and center, guiding your work and informing decision making. Include reviewing the work plan as a standing item on board and leadership team agendas. Check in on progress, see what's supposed to be happening next, and align capacity to the work plan regularly. Honor what you planned to do and balance that with emerging needs and decisions. You can also use the work plan for check-ins with staff and volunteers to understand progress being made toward individual goals or shifts that need to happen in the work. The work plan is a wonderful tool for generating working group and committee plans or informing their agendas and actions. You can think of this as a nested work plan. The organization's work plan might say that we need to form a communications committee and that the committee will improve digital outreach. However, the committee itself can build out a work plan of its own, detailing how it will achieve the digital outreach goal. If your work plan is kept digitally, you can link the committee work plan directly in the organizational work plan, and everything is accessible in one place. Lastly, a work plan is a great tool for creating an annual evaluation. We're going to talk at length about evaluations in our next series, but here's the teaser. You'll want to have a way to see if you made progress toward your goals. The actions in your work plan are great indicators of this, but only if we actually take the time to review them. Let's take a moment to recap this episode as it was a very full one. We reviewed the basics of budgets, what they are, what they tell us, who is involved, how to present your budget, and basic budget tools. We also talked about work plans, the benefits of work planning, steps to creating a plan, using the work plan template, marrying the budget and the work plan, and how to use the work plan once it's completed. The biggest takeaway is to recognize what kinds of tools will support the work you do. Not every group or organization needs the same tools or systems. We encourage you to take what works for you, adapt it to your best ability, and focus the bulk of your energy on making an impact on your community. This was the last episode in the Organizational Health Self-Paced Learning series. We have now covered every topic on the Organizational Health Checklist. Remember, you can download the checklist from River Network or Hudson River Watershed Alliance and work through it on your own. There are some helpful links and discussion prompts throughout the checklist, and these episodes build additional context for each item. Like we said earlier, River Network does its best work in partnership with others. While we produce tools and trainings of our own, we also lean on other capacity building organizations for support and expertise. Check out BoardSource, TREC, and National Council of Nonprofits for additional resources and templates. You may find that certain tools work better for you than the ones we've provided in this series, and that's quite all right with us. Thanks again for joining us for episode 4 and the last episode in the Organizational Health video series. For more resources to support your group or organization, visit River Network's website at rivernetwork.org. We have additional videos, downloadable resources, and tools for your use.